this trail is to make a right turn, and the grandmother tree is just up here a couple hundred yards, and she is gorgeous. And it's probably the oldest one in the park. I think she's 450, maybe 550 years old. So if you think about that, she could be a pre-Columbian living Native American artifact. And how many of those are we going to have in our lifetime? So, and then if you go where she's pointing, is two directions. The trunk bifurcates. She points up the hill, and that's where there's a portal tree, gorgeous pair of trees. Over the ridge is an ascension tree. So there's another wonderful story that unfolds as you go that way. But the other part of the tree is pointing to the south, and that's where this trail used to point. So if you come back to this area, and that's what I think this trail marker tree, this burial tree is pointing at, is the prophecy tree. And the prophecy tree is the most rare of all of the 5 types of Ute prayer trees. It's the only one that foretells of a prophet or prophecy, something to come. Everything else is past tense. You know, we found water here, we had a battle here, we buried someone over here. So this prophecy tree is also called the hugging tree, and it's just beautiful. It comes up about 16, 18 feet out of the ground, and it reaches over and hugs an older tree, and it's just a marvelous, like a living sculpture. So if you come back, don't walk right along the trail where they're trying to revegetate, just go off the trail a little bit, and you'll find the trail marker tree right this side of a barbed wire fence, which denotes some private property there. So
before the barbed wire.
Yeah, before the barbed wire. Yeah. So if you come back, these are 2 areas to explore. Redirected and twisted, and a tree can't do that on its own.
Yeah.
As that tree was growing, someone's come back and deliberately torqued it to continue pointing that direction.
Right.
They girdled right here where the tree wanted to go that way, and they said, oh, no, 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 not yet. So they kept taking it that direction. It has a great peel bark. It does have fire that's introduced. And the first few times I came to study this tree, once I realized what I was looking at, I noticed there was a small bird that would come every time I was here. And he'd hop along the tree and he'd chirp at me, and he'd come all the way down here and chirp at me. I just thought it was my magnetic personality. About the 3rd time I was here, I looked in and I realized someone had been putting wild bird seed in there. So I was telling me, hey, feed me, buddy, you know. It wasn't me at all. But I wondered, well, how did they get to that height? Because this tells you how astute I am as an observer. I'm standing here trying to think, well, they must have been standing on something, either a rock or a tree trunk, to reach up here, because it's so high you can't do that. And as I'm studying it, a lady on a horse came by, and okay, all right, I got this. So that's the perfect height, you know, to just reach over as you're riding by on horseback. So
What tree is this?
What a great question.
The medicine tree?
I think with a peeled bark, but it's also directional. It's on a trail.
Right.
I think you could say it's dual use. It's probably a trail marker tree. But what I wanted you to do was to look at the one right behind it, and you can see where the primary goes off there, and it's been girdled. It's at a lean. Now turn and look at the one next to Conrad here. Notice it has some unusual bends. And then look at the one right behind it, where it comes up, and then it goes 2 different directions. The primary is killed off. It has kind of an interesting spiral kind of a thing. Then look down the hill, there's another one and another one. And what you realize is there's 6 in a perfect alignment here with Tava, with Pikes Peak, which is just right off over there, with a trail running through it. So that can't be coincidental. There's one more at the top of the hill that was used, we think, for a lookout to see, Pikes Peak. There's a wonderful signaling system that they had with smoke or fire or mirrors during the daylight for the flash signals. So anyway, that's all. And it does look very bonsai-like. In fact, this picture is one I'm going to show to the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society at their annual meeting in January. I'm their guest speaker, so I want to put this picture in there. But I walked by this tree many times thinking it's too small. Then over time came back and studied it. Notice that it has our cut down at the bottom on the inside and the gouge marks. On this side, if you come over here, you see it's got a cut. Matter of fact, I might get another picture of this while we're here. just to show with them.
Yeah, it's cut right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that hip cut.
That
Yeah.
hip.
There.
And look at this. I think this has been girdled right here.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I think this has got multiple indications of human interaction. Now, why it has not grown any bigger, I don't know if it was stunted, you know, from all of this manipulation. But I do know this: when you follow where this is pointing, we can't see her today. Just kind. Pikes Peak's over there, but also the grandmother trees, right about two ridges over. So the oldest tree in Fox Run happens to be where this one's pointing. And also, if you,
Sorry, we have two very tall fir trees, and I call the tallest one Grandpa.
but if you look, there's one right there that's bent, kind of pointing to where we stopped and got our picture, where it's in the sunlight now. And then if you drew kind of an alignment here between that tree, this trail, there's another beautiful trail marker tree. And we won't go over to it, but we're going to walk past it, and I'll point it to you. We might have to be out here on the trail to see it. But there's three right here in a row with this trail in between. So this trail marker tree here, actually we might come out to this point to see it a little bit better. So you can see it's got our 30-degree angle, but notice that the primary trunk continues growing for a long time, so they never returned and girdled that. Why, I don't know. You know, it just didn't happen. It is pointing kind of towards Tava. On the left side, it's got a beautiful peeled bark pattern where you can see the cut, the gouge, the tear at the bottom when they remove the bark, and then the primary bark or trunk. The secondary, the leader took over there. So I don't know how long we'll have that tree when it goes down. I want to try to get permission to do a dendrochronology analysis of the tree rings at the bottom. The problem with trying to drill it, you know, to extract a core, is it's hard to tell where that pith ring is at, because you know when it takes on that oval shape, that pith ring's out of sync. It's no longer right in the center.
It's called a
Everybody with
pith ring.
P-I-T-H, like a pith of a seed.
Yeah.
So when the pine cone has got the seeds and it's growing, that's year one is a pith ring. Yeah.
When park management goes through and decides, you know, how to thin the forest, you know, at this point, they understand which ones are fir trees
That's
that
what I was
they
thinking.
shouldn't cut down.
El Paso County definitely does. And some of the other forests, but some of the foresters, like on state property, and Conrad and I had this discussion in national forests. There's some resistance on accepting these, and I think it's more out of just not knowing, you know, what they're looking at. And some of the cultural people, when you talk to them, say, no, we never did that, and we don't know if that's because they didn't know about it, unless they're older, because this is a tradition that's no longer being passed on, or and I think this may be the case, particularly with the burial tree. If they think the only reason the trees have survived so long is they kind of blend in, people don't know about them. And if we have people who are looking for artifacts, you know, relic hunters, you don't want them digging around a burial tree, and so and I wouldn't want that either. And I've weighed this risk as I do the talks and the books. I think it's better to let people know about them than not, because I think there's so many people that, especially here in El Paso County, that, you know, want to be responsible stewards of the forest. And so I've talked to all of the El Paso County Park people and tried to reach city and state and national, but it's kind of hit and miss with a lot of them. But El Paso County, fortunately, they know
County
about
for
it.
sure. So,
Yeah.
so the ones here
Yeah.
in the regional parks are safe. But
Yes.
when you get to the state or national level,
Right,
it's
yeah.
possible they
But
could
I
be.
will tell you, I think here in Colorado, the private land acreage-wise way exceeds, you know, the public lands. So I think that educating the private landowner
So I
you know, is
don't
probably
hang my
more
swing in
important.
it?
Yeah, like you.
Don't cut
put a
your
swing.
stem.
I wasn't going to cut it down, but I don't think I could hang a swing in it either.
Yeah. Well, let's move this on and part of the Ute people and many Native American traditions as well. But notice that lightning strike, probably up about 12 feet. It's starting to get some holes. Now that's from a bird, and I can't remember the name of the bird, but it builds its nest in the tree. So it where the lightning strike opened up the heartwood, it's now able to build its nest inside that tree. And when I first saw that, I had remembered there are several trees here in the forest that have the pine beetle that's affected, and the birds come along, you know, and they try to get into, you know, the larvae, you know, to eat that. I think they can hear it or they smell it or something. I don't know exactly how they know the pine beetle's in there. But when I saw the holes being put in there, I thought that's such a neat story and a neat tree that with the birds in there, though, that's going to accelerate, you know, the death of the tree, the half-life of the tree. So I'd considered trying to convince the park people to put like a chain, you know, wire, you know, around that to protect it. Yeah, like a chicken wire or something. And it just so happened I was within the week, I was in Breckenridge where the pine beetle had gotten into some of the trees because you could see it coming down this hill. And so there was an owner that had like 5 of these trees, and he said, I'm thinking about spraying these 5 prayer trees just to protect them. What do you think? And I told him, I think that's a wonderful idea. If they were mine, I'd spray them too. But I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to be meeting Dr. Jefferson, one of the Ute elders who I mentioned in my book, on the reservation. Hi there, how are you? So I said, let me ask Dr. Jefferson what he thinks about spraying the trees, you know, for pine beetle. Because I think it's a good idea, and I'll call you and let you know. So when I saw Dr. Jefferson on the reservation that following week, I told him the story, and I said, sir, I'm thinking that it's a good idea to have them, you know, spray the tree for the pine beetle. What do you think? And without missing a beat, he said, what's the pine beetle think? I'd never thought about it for the pine beetle. And he turned and he walked away and he's left me, you know. And so yeah, the pine beetle probably didn't think much of that. You know? But when you think about it, you know, if the pine beetle falls and a bird eats it or it gets in the water system or whatever, but the reason he didn't have to think about that is because that's the way he grew up. He thinks of everything holistically, where I think it's just an insect, a pest. But he would think that beetle or the bird that's now made its habitat in that tree, and the tree is willing to allow that to happen, that's part of that circle of life, and it's really kind of a beautiful thing. So it's really taught me again how we have so much to learn, non-native people from Native American people. Let's head on down the trail, and I'll point out a couple more here, and we'll warm up as we're walking. Well, somebody was at that talk.
That was me.
That was you at Pikes Peak Community College right after the first book came out. And there was a lady sitting in the back, and she was one of these people who you could tell was really paying attention, you know, taking notes, you know, and was really fascinated. And then at the end, there were a lot of people who came up, you know, to talk and to buy a book or whatever. And she stood in the back of the line and waited at least half an hour, maybe 40 minutes before she got to where I was standing signing books. And when she got there, she held up her iPhone and she said, have you seen this tree? And I said, oh, I know that tree. It's this one here in Fox Run. I said, I know exactly where that's at. And she said, did you notice that there's a dedication bench that's been added? And I said, well, I did know that dedication bench had been added because I had just come down that trail and just happened to catch it at the moment that the 2 park employees were putting the dedication bench in. It had a little brass plaque, and I was trying to read it while they were, you know, doing their job, trying to, all right, okay, come on, buddy, you don't leave me alone. I said, well, what's the story on the dedication bench, and why is it here? And they said, I don't know, you know, we're just putting in the bench where they told us to. You know, get out of our way, you know, you're bothering
Full
us.
of knowledge, full of information.
So I go on my way, and so here's this lady showing me a picture of this tree that knows the story of the bench. And she said, it's not a good story, it's rather sad, but it's important. And she said the lady whose name's on the bench, her first name's Sonia, is a teacher, first grade, Prairie Winds Elementary, married with 2 children. They're up at Cripple Creek, you know, like we all do, go up, you know, look at the trees in the fall turning. I think it's October. And as they're coming home, the two children in the back seat, preschool, and one of them drops something, or just for a moment, she slips off her seatbelt, like we've all done, and as she's reaching back, they're involved in a head-on collision, and she's killed. And the lady who's telling me the story said, "I'm the godmother of the two children." And Sonia's family's from Pennsylvania, and they have a family plot there. That's where, you know, she was going to be buried. And so the children wanted a place where they could come and visit, you know, think about their mother. And so their mother used to take them to fox runs. They could feed the ducks and play at the playground and everything. So the kids picked this spot to remember their mother, and not knowing anything about the trees. So the lady, the godmother, is at the talk at PPCC to learn about the trees so that she could tell the children the story when it was older. And I said, I think this must have been a very sacred place. And I don't know how they felt that, or it was just, you know, coincidence, but I do know this.
There's a burial tree.
There's a burial tree, and another burial tree, and another burial tree. I think the Ute would think this is a very sacred place. But here's the impactful moment, because the next spring I came back through here. Now I can't walk past that bench without looking and thinking of her. And the closest tree to that bench was struck by lightning, and it's lived. That's La Ponderosa right there.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's walk on.
That's crazy.
We'll warm up
I
here.
think it's so interesting about all this, and if you look at it from their spiritual perspective and belief, is that these trees, that they had to agree to it, so they gave themselves in service
Right.
for people to find their way or to honor their ancestors, to continue their tradition and stuff. So these trees are very sacred because they're giving themselves in service.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct, and I want to take a pulse of everybody. I was going to add to that story, but I'm a little cognizant of the fact that we've only got 15 minutes left if we're going to be back right at noon. How's everybody on time? Do you have a little flexibility on time? Because I'd like to add to that story if I might. Are you guys okay on time?
You gotta ask the boss.
Oh, where's the boss at?
He's up there taking
Okay.
pictures.
Okay.
Good.
What we're going to do is we're going to go down this trail, and then we make a loop, and then we'll come back up over here, and we'll be back at the car, I think in about a half an hour. So we may be about 15 or 20 minutes late. I hope I don't throw anybody's lunch plans or anything off.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
See that
Parallels the ground, so it's a different technique. So I don't know if that's different people or different tribal family, but there's our primary trunk right there. You can see our tie-down marks, and this is a very pronounced cut at the hip, at the first bend, to help facilitate that bend. And it's pointing at that tree, which points to the top of the hill at that tree. And this tree is the one I want you to see, because that is probably the biggest and maybe the oldest in this part of the Black Forest. Part of the anyway. And as you go by, notice, I'll wait for them to catch up.
You know, that's so interesting about this being the highest point.
Is it?
If you've, been in the East, and we have, we lived in Tennessee and Virginia and all these places, and you think, wow, these are high mountains. Smokies, Blue Ridge Mountains, and Maine, Mount Katahdin and all this, and we're thinking, wow, high mountains.
Right, yeah.
And then where we're standing right now is higher than any of that. So. So all the water flows from this direction.
Yeah, rolls out.
Yeah.
So this is our primary trunk. So this was how big the tree was when it was first selected. So they're working with really small trees. And so that was probably an old original trail. They bent the tree as it was growing. They came back and girdled it. And notice how it has that V shape where it makes the cut here and stop, and then the cut here, peeling off that part to make sure the tree continues to grow that direction. And then if we come around this way, was trying to see if there was any smell of butterscotch or vanilla. Sometimes in the older trees you can pick that up, but that's usually more in the spring, or in the fall or in the summer. I didn't really smell any. Did you smell
I
any?
didn't.
Yeah.
I have a pretty good nose.
Yeah.
I have smelled these trees in California.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful scent, and but I think the cambium, the sap has to be running to get that. Yeah, and it's got a nice series of ligature marks. So we think that these up here are the higher ones. So as the tree is growing, they're returning, and repositioning the ligature mark down lower and lower, creating that bend. There's not any real, peeled bark, like over on that one, and they didn't, sever any of the bark.
What do you think that was? Or is that just a fluke?
I don't know.
Oh, is that a nail?
Uh,
No, it's just a piece of bark. That's what a nail did.
This area was actually a fox farm, and there were hundreds of fox that were raised here. So some of the trees were used, for like putting up, the fences and stuff. So
Do you see that thing?
Straight up, you'll see how that.
Oh, yeah.
Close to the ground it goes
oh,
up.
that one right there, that bent one
Yeah.
there.
I believe that one's the one that's got the spiral and the lightning strikes.
Well, I know that one is a burial tree, and it's got down at the base there, a curve in the wood, at that bend, that hip. And I think that's what this one's pointing at. Is that tree right there?
Oh,
Well, I wanted to show this one to you because we've got 6 trees right here in this area that I think are all interrelated that help tell the story. And it's probably not a good story because at least half of them are burial trees. So I don't know if that means people, died from disease, cholera, or smallpox really affected the Native American people here in a tragic way. And or it could be battle or something that happened in this area. But this tree here, notice how it comes, it's got a unnatural bend. You probably can't see it over there, but it does have a cut right here, consistent with, redirecting, loosening the fibers. It has kind of an interesting deformation here. But that primary trunk right there is really telling because it's very small, which gives us the indication that the size of the tree wasn't any bigger than that when they modified it. And it's been girdled. And this girdling on this one, if you haven't gotten a good look, this is a good one to see because it appears that the girdling starts like at 12 o'clock and the cut goes around the tree, and then it looks to me like they're changing hands with the knife or whatever they're using, and then girdling on the other side, and it creates kind of a little V, like a V-neck t-shirt, So it creates a little V at the bottom, which is a pattern that we see repeated over and over again. So we know that that's a man-caused imperfection purposely to kill off that part of the tree to redirect the natural growth. So when you compare that to the size of the tree, that happened a long time ago. This one also has a wonderful set of tie-down marks, ligature marks across the bark, across here. Can you see these tie-down marks in here? And so that's another indication that the tree was redirected as it's growing, pointing up that direction.
So was this the cut like in the other one that was really super 90? Did it just not quite get as 90 as they wanted it to?
Well, that's a good question.
This part right here.
This is small. Yeah, this is smaller. So, and I don't know if it means that the tree was younger, or they didn't need to move as much, or they didn't intend it to go, at a full 90.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a good question because it is different. You're right. It is. I think it's not done like for cambium extraction like some of them. I think the purpose is probably different. But this is what I wanted you to see. If you look up this drainage area here, you see that one burial tree right at the top there? It makes a curve right around the ground and goes back up. Nick noticed this earlier, and that might have been lightning struck, he mentioned. If you're on a creek or river or stream bed, for navigational purposes, the frontier people would say you're either on the left bank or the right bank as you're looking downstream. So if you're looking downstream and someone, Nick came along and he's put up a stacked rock cairn, he might tell us, or we might hear, you take a right, at the rock cairn, or you don't have a trail marker tree, So if you're looking up this stream, that's the left bank. So when you get to the top of the left bank, that's what that tree is pointing at. If you go
Like
just
stage
over,
left and right. So
Correct.
confusing. I've never figured it out.
yeah. So navigation is downstream towards the water, the ocean. If you go just over the hill here, is the Palmer Divide. It just maybe only a quarter of a mile. And the Palmer Divide loops all the way through the Black Forest. The high point is on Swan Road. Right here it's 7,415 feet right at the ridge. Swan Road gets to 7,995 feet, and then slowly drops back down, but it makes kind of like a horseshoe, kind of a look through there, through El Paso County. The Palmer Ridge is the highest point in the United States east of the Rocky Mountains. So if you think about that, everything from the Rocky Mountains east all the way to the Atlantic Ocean is lower than we are. So if you're following, wanting to know where that river comes from, if you go from Gulf of Mexico up the Mississippi and you take a left at the Arkansas and you take a left at Fountain Creek and you take these tributaries, this one happens to be Black Squirrel Creek, and you keep following it to the headwaters are right here.
Wow.
But on the other side of Palmer Divide, all of the snow melt and the water flows north. Here they all flow south. We have 9 streams, 5 on this side of Palmer Divide, 4 on the other. Plum Creek, Cherry Creek, Kiowa Creek, I can't remember all the creeks. But this is the highest point in the U.S. So if you're coming up the other direction and you go Mississippi, Missouri, Platte, South Platte, and you're saying, where does this water come from? Then you get higher and higher. And on this side of the Front Range, this is the highest point right here in El Paso County. So geographically, it was a very important place. So let's go look at this guy.
Horizontal. So
Which
what do you think
direction
that
is it pointing?
toward our
pointing toward
house?
Pikes
North almost. Well,
No, it comes toward the house.
I don't know.
Yeah,
You should come
I
back
thought it
on
was
your way
kind
out
of
I
of
would
the...
like that. Yeah. This one over
Well, I don't know
here.
which direction we're pointing now, but you...
What kind of tree is this?
Uh-huh. Well,
Just
Pikes
pointing
Peak
toward
is
the
over
house.
that
Oh, it
way.
is. Okay.
Let me point out a few things on this tree, and then we'll go look at the
Look at this tree again.
Well, we're classifying it, if we got it right, as a medicine tree because the predominant feature is the
This
big
tree.
peel bark.
Right.
So we know at least that's part of it. But this one doesn't have peeled bark, so and it's a different configuration. We're thinking that's more of a story tree, but the reality is there's probably, we know prayers associated with all of them, so they're all prayer trees, and we think most of them probably have a story, too. But we think the predominant feature on this one with the peeled bark. But notice that it was bent at an angle. This is an old trail, and we know that because there's a big burial tree right down there by that bench, and we'll stop over there and get a group picture. And that's one of the oldest ones in the park, and it's right next to that trail. So we think that this trail is an original trail through here. So we think that tree was bent originally towards that trail. And then notice this big burl, this outgrowth here, it's called a burl, a B-U-R-L. And a burl can be naturally created, and a forester will tell you that they're created when a foreign object is embedded into the tree, and then the tree just grows around that foreign object just in case and kind of quarantine it off. And so that can form naturally. This is not natural. The peel is consistent, with Native American traditions. And one of the traditions in the Ute is when the Ute men in the fall, when they collected and dried the kinnikinick and the grasses for their tobacco, in the winter they would gather in the medicine man's teepee and they would smoke the pipe in prayer, but they would save the ashes in an elk bag, a little pouch that they'd wear around their neck, and it was sacred because that's where all the prayers for the whole season. And then in the spring, when they got ready to do the buffalo hunts, which would be out on the high plains, and the plains start right over that ridge. That's Palmer Divide. So if you just go over that hill, maybe 3/4 mile, you start seeing the high plains that runs all the way to Nebraska and to Kansas. So that's where the buffalo were. So this would be a natural place to stop, you know, before the hunt, which always began in prayer and ended in prayer if you were successful. So the medicine man would take the elk pouch that contained all the ash, and he'd combine all of the ashes from that whole winter season into one pouch, and he'd select a ponderosa pine, open the bark, tie the pouch, the leather pouch around there, hoping the tree would encase the leather pouch, which contained the prayers, which meant that the tree would encase and preserve the prayers for the lifespan of the tree. So we think this burl may be ceremonial. But here's an interesting question. What happened first? Was the burl created and then somebody returned and peeled the bark, or was the bark peeled and then the burl grew around it? I think you already got it, didn't you?
No, I'm just seeing the question. That's exactly the question.
I think you're right. Yeah, because oh no, wait a minute. No, I think because notice that the cut goes out this way.
Yeah.
I think if the burl was here, it'd be straight. I think the burl is taking the cut outward. So I think the peeled bark existed before the burl. So I think the tree was bent at an angle, and I don't know about up here. Notice how it starts to spiral, and on the inside of the spiral, can you see where the tie down marks here? The ligature marks? And so somebody is either tying that like to another tree, or they created kind of a, you know, a brace or something up there, you know, to create that spiral effect. And the spiral is important with many Native Americans. It's indicative of life, the spiral of life.
Right.
And as the tree was turning, I think the bark had to have been peeled first, because I don't think you could peel the bark on the inside of that curve. So I think this was a sacred tree that had medicine, and then it had maybe some of the bends, but I think many of the bends happened after that burl, because that's been there a long time. And again, it was done at this height, so you know that it didn't grow to that height, and it's not going to grow any further. that height's fixed. Notice also that it has a charred portion here, and you know, when we see char on an open wood, you know, we think of it natural, like a forest fire, you know, or a wildlife fire, which grows across the ground. But notice there's no charred marks down at the bottom. It only starts way up here. And that would be more consistent if we had a fire and we took a fire that's burning, you know, on a branch, and then we just introduced that to that height ceremonially, because fire is sacred too. And if this had sap seeping around it when the fire's introduced, it's not going to be like a Roman candle, but it's going to be pretty dramatic. You know, it's going to, especially in the dark at night. So this has got a lot of different features going on ceremonially. And if we go over to this tree, there appears to be more of a story over time associated. And we think that the height is about the same. See how the top of that one is kind of crowned already? It's no longer growing up. You can take off?
Yeah, he needs to use the restroom and get cold out.
No worries.
Thank you so much. It was a
You're
pleasure.
welcome. Bye, Jeremiah. Everybody else doing okay? Yeah. Okay. All right.
That's great. Learning a lot.
And well, it's fun to share with people, especially people who are interested, you know, and want to, you know, to learn more, you know, about our indigenous people. And I think this is just such a gift, a legacy, you know, that's been left for us. And I think it's our responsibility in our generation to preserve that legacy and to pass that on. And that's kind of what's motivated our research. But this tree, notice the color of the bark's about the same, the diameter, the size. We think they were done about the same time, but obviously for different purposes. So as this one's growing, notice that it changes direction. And then if you come over to this side, this was our primary trunk here. And notice how it's been girdled. Someone's cut all the way around that one and then redirected its growth. And then if you come around on this side, you can see how in the redirection,
Then they did another one.
yeah, it was pointing straight at Pikes Peak. Well, Pikes Peak was the most sacred of all the Shining Mountains. The Ute homeland extended from northern New Mexico all the way across the Rockies into Wyoming, and from the Great Plains almost halfway to Kansas, all the way into eastern Utah. And we found these trees all throughout that homeland. So out of all of the shining mountains, their most sacred mountain was called Tava, T-A-V-A, and we call it Pikes Peak today. So they would often.
You did?
What's that?
She already knew that.
Oh, you knew that one? Tava?
Oh, you could be the teacher's pet.
No.
Well, I'm glad, because we want other people to pass this story on too. So
I
Tava,
didn't know it.
many of the trees, the prayer trees, are pointed towards Tava to kind of channel the prayer. And with the Ute men, they would rise before sunrise, get to the high ground, face south, and when they're on the front range, they knew that before the sun came up, that as it's getting ready to come over the horizon, you could see it first on Tava. And that first light in many Native American cultures is sacred. There's a name for that.
Cool.
And I had the privilege of being here with some friends from Canada who were from the Ojibwa Nation, and they gave me the name, and I can't pronounce it, but I've written it down so I don't forget it. But many tribes recognize that first light. So when the Ute men began their prayers, this is called sunwise, that they want to be facing south and on their left when the sunrise and it hit Pikes Peak. That's recognized as a sacred time, a sacred gift from a creator. And that gift is a gift of a new day, and that new day is sacred. So they teach the children that you use each gift from Creator wisely.
That's a smart
and it's again something I think we can pass on, to our children.
We need to learn that.
If you notice this primary has a perfect cut, that can only be done, with a sharp edge instrument, and you can see some tie down marks.
Yeah,
But after the primary was killed off on this one, and I don't know why, but then the tree started growing this way, and it's been bifurcated. See, the trunk part of it goes up there, so there's probably like another story there, and then the other part goes off here, and you can see on the inside here, ligature marks, tie down marks, and here on the different bends. So it's being redirected after that. So I don't know what's causing that.
Original trunk again?
Well, the original was coming up here and then girdled, and then over here and then girdled, and then split. So that's
But
still...
this guy over here,
Yeah.
is that just a random branch?
Oh, no, I don't think it's random. I think you're right. I think that was part of... Which one are you pointing at?
This one, right? This
Yeah.
little guy that was big.
Yeah, I think they split the original, and it went off in two directions, and then I think it split again. Yeah, I think this was girdled here too.
So the bifurcation there, is that a natural process, or is that something they actually did?
That it's something I think they actually did, and
because I know that occurs naturally.
Yeah, and the reason I think this is non-natural is I think this tie-down mark right here is part of the redirection.
Right.
And then when you look on the inside here, you can see tie-down. So,
That looks like one right there.
and I think you're right. I think you're right. So I think there was something that they were trying to tell us about over that way, north of Tava. Could be a battle. We may never know, but I think there was a story that was important, that's documented in the tree. Now, when you look at these two trees, this didn't happen, all at once, it happened over time, and in fact might have happened over several generations. It may be similar to the Japanese, the bonsai traditions, where you start the tree when you're a young man, then you pass it on to a grandson or granddaughter as you're growing and getting ready to pass on, and then it could be passed on. We think some of these are probably 5, 6, maybe 7 generations. Because that one over there, it took a long time to create that, because you still have modifications way up high.
So this being a story tree, it's for historical.
Something with their history, something important happened here. And if we go down here, we might see part of the...
There's a lightning strike tree right over there.
Oh, I didn't see
Spiral.
that. Oh, how about that?
So John, this way this is twisting a little bit, is that just...
That one.
Here to point out or to photograph. Obviously, it's got an unnatural bend with 2 90-degree bends to the trunk, which is different than the 30-degree, so it's done in a different way for a different purpose. How the Cherokee made 2 bends, and we know this since the Cherokee had a written language. This is captured in their written history as well as the oral history, is they would take, and again this is when the tree's very young and pliable, and they would take what's called a thong. It looks like it's like a dead branch, or it looks like a slingshot, you know, capital Y, and they would drive the one stick in the ground, and then where the notch is, they would bend the tree at that first curve and run it horizontally across the ground, and then they would tie the ligature around the second bend to the wooden stake that they would have in the ground. Now the tree, you know, just naturally wants to resume its original posture, so it's fighting, you know, that tie down, and so to help facilitate that bend, what the Cherokee did, and we believe this was adopted by other tribes, or maybe they learned it from other tribes, is they would take a sharp-edged instrument, a knife or something, and they would cut along that first bend. This first bend is called a hip, so they'd make an external cut across the hip, opening up the heartwood, and then a second cut going horizontally across the fibers of the wood. And it's kind of like if you wanted your bicycle tire to bend over, and it wants to resume its natural position. If you cut the rubber along the outer part, and it exposes the fibers, the cord in the tire, and if you severed some of the upper cord, it's going to lay down a little easier, and that's what this is here. Notice here we have different indentation in the bark, and that's the tie-down marks. That's called a cross-grain scarring, and there's multiples. So what we know is that when they tied that down originally, the tree would grow, and then they'd have to return and retie it. And they'd probably use the same wooden stake in the ground and just move that cordage down. So you can see these indentations, these real tight, it's almost like if you took like baling wire and put it around a younger tree, and then, you know, as the tree's growing,
You're fighting against it.
right, and then you just took that off. So obviously the cordage or the leather or whatever they had wore off, and they just took that off. So I'd like you to come to this side over here, because this has got something interesting we can learn. Now I know the tree doesn't look as big as some of these others, but it's an older tree. We know that from the color, the orange. Another reason we know it's older is see some of the tops of these other trees that are pointed, kind of, it's like an arrowhead or a lance point. Those trees are still growing from the top up. But then when they get, see this big one right here that's kind of flattened? When they reach their half-life, where they're not growing up anymore, they'll still grow out. But then they take on, it's called molting, so they kind of get this dome shape on top. And this one's starting to mold, and it's got our orangish color. So the size of the tree is more determined by the soil composition. Excuse me, my nose is running. The size of the tree is more dependent upon the soil composition, access to water, sunlight, those kinds of things. But I wanted you over here so you could see the, this was the primary trunk, you know, that it probably had withered and died. And so someone, probably a forest person here, not park person, came along and just, you know, doing fire mitigation, just took that off. And you could see that it was a metal saw, you know, that cut through there, and so, which is too bad. It would be nice to have the pointer, but it's probably what they're thinking, it's fire mitigation, and it's also probably right in the way, you know, if somebody's walking by here, so they probably didn't know. But the one good thing it does is it opens that up, so now we can see it's like a bullseye, like a target. That's the pith ring right there, and then it adds a ring and another ring and another ring. But notice right here, it goes out, it goes oval. Yeah, it takes on that oval shape. So it's growing the rings out this way.
See how it's not
So from the pith ring, year one up to here, I don't know how many rings that is, but it's only about an inch. But from here to here, it's more like 3 inches. So it's like got a 3-to-1 growth rate below that, and then it was cut off some years ago. But so we think this tree, now again, it's going to have more rings at the bottom, and the fewer rings the further up you go. So, but this I think gives us an idea, and I think I counted this once. I think there was 18 between there and when it went out around. So we think that's about the age, and maybe the size, you know, because they can't be too big when they do that. But it does have that bench kind of a look and feel, and we're told that some of the grandmothers, when they would bring the grandchildren by here, and in the Ute tradition, and probably most tribes are this way, the grandchildren are not just your biological children, they're your tribal children. And so any child nearby is your child, is your grandchild. And so the elders, the women in particular, were the storytellers. And they would bring the grandchildren and sit on a tree and tell the stories, because all their history is oral. So they would talk about who this tree might be honoring. It could be an honored grandmother or a warrior or someone who died in battle. And then after that person or the tree is honoring, then their ancestors, their loved ones, children, would want to be buried near them too. So there could be more people buried in this area here too.
So the trees was right angles on burial trees?
Yes, correct. You got it.
And we have a place here where it was, pulled over.
Yeah, your tie down marks. Very good.
Over here.
Yes, very good. Yeah, you're getting it. Yeah, you've got it. Yeah.
So people were buried around the tree as opposed to on the tree.
Correct. Yeah, it's somewhere off in that distance over there, probably.
Okay.
We think.
Points
yeah.
to the burial site.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, kind of like a grave marker.
Yeah.
And again, without a written language, the history is captured orally here. So we've seen the trail marker tree with 130 and the burial with 290. So that's the distinction between those two. You want to see a medicine tree and a story tree? They're right around the corner. Go on. Has the same curve. That second one has a wonderful large peel bark pattern, and notice that it kind of has an upward angle from the left to the right, like from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock position. That happens about 90% of the time. About 10% of the time it goes from the lower right to the upper left. The only reason I can guess at that is our population is about 11% left-handed. So this is just a guess on my part, but I wonder if that, when it goes the opposite direction. So Jeremiah is going to point out that tree to us, and notice that just below that first cut, you have your gouge marks, and they're very deep. And then, you can't see it from here, but just below where his hand is at is a tear. So if you follow the curve just above Robert's head there, see that looks like a dead branch again? That's your primary. It's got a peel. There's another one on the other side, and they both been girdled. So they were redirecting it, and both of them had the same angle and pointing kind of off that direction too. I don't know what those were created for, but I do know this. The dimensions on that second one over there where Jeremiah is at, okay, you can come in now.
Come on, Jeremiah.
Thank you. Yay, Jeremiah.
He needed a distraction anyway. The width and the height is consistent with a cradle board, and the women would often use the outer bark of the ponderosa pine, and they'd cover it with elk hide or deer hide for the papoose that they would carry for their babies. And sometimes they would hang that cradle board in the trees and let the wind blow and rock the baby to sleep. It also keeps the baby out of the way, getting in in some place where they shouldn't, or keeping them safe. The young boys would sometimes climb the trees at night and tie themselves into the trees to sleep. And it was a natural thing for them to be up high in the trees. Some were even known to weave a hammock, and they would sleep and allow the breeze to blow. So it was a natural thing that some of they grew up with. But their purpose up there was also to be a lookout, to be a scout. And so if they saw enemy approaching or game, they had different bird calls and whistles, and they could mimic most birds. So a particular bird might mean that there's enemy or an unknown rider or game that's approaching. So that was another purpose of the young boys. Let's move on up the trail and we'll look at a burial tree.